and talk about crafty contingencies and spectacular special steps. And our objectives today, we want to talk about, how to use well-crafted, language in your offers and counter offers, specifically for contingencies and special stipulations. And, what can happen, as Bobby Noreen used to say, what if the consequences for badly written ones. We're going to dive into the Tennessee REALTORS RF707, quote, additional contract language is its name. And we'll talk a little bit about other village approved clauses. We're going to review some real world examples of poorly crafted contingency language. Folks, I did not make this up. I went into actual transaction documents from a couple of different folks, mostly mine, and not that I wrote, of course, that I received, and found some bad language. And let's talk about why it's bad and how we would fix it. And then I'd love for everybody to walk away with some tools, some tips that'll help you be a master of contingencies and special steps, all right? Because we want to provide our clients the highest and best service and results, and also keep you out of trouble, which we can get there pretty quickly. Just as a reminder before we start, this is actually a little misleading, the title. We're going to talk about where all the language is already written, or most of it anyway, a lot of it. So we don't have to write it. We don't have to write it from scratch, right? This stuff has already been written by the lawyers with the Tennessee REALTORS. Boy Carney's written some for us. So it's going to be very rare that we're actually going to be creating something new. Right. Keep in mind that it is against our TREC guidelines to practice law. So unless you have a law degree, let's use the language that lawyers have written to the extent that we can. So let's talk about all that's already out there for us. Want to turn my video off. Oh, that's to Angela, because you're looking at my bad side from Angela's. I'm just going to tilt it away.
Getting a nice.
There we go.
That's that a window or a flower or something.
Thanks Dee for the PM to Angela. I just happened to see it there.
There.
Oh, gotcha. Well, I'll translate. So, all right. So consequences of poor wording. All right. Most importantly, failure to protect and represent your client in the best way. You could end up giving away or fail to secure concessions that your client wants. And you could also contradict or negate protections that are already provided for in the purchase and sale agreement. Right. And so again, this goes back to not practicing law. In legal contracts, there are legal terms like indemnification and those sorts of things. And then there are business terms. We just want to focus on business terms, right? Those are the things that we can write in. That's why we have a box for special steps, but we're supposed to stick to business terms there, not legal terms, right? So, so anytime we go and do something, write language that possibly contradicts or negates language that's already been written there by the lawyers, we can get our clients and ourselves in trouble. And that gets into failure to protect yourself and your license. It could earn you a TREC complaint, right? Or potentially a violation and a monetary penalty. And there's a fine line between negotiating business terms and practicing law, which again is a definite TREC no-no. And at minimum, it would likely cost you that client and future referrals from them. All right, so that's the why we want to be masters at this. All right. So here's the first example. All right, this is actual language from special steps. Seller to pay seller's portion of expenses and buyer to pay for buyer's portion of expenses. Seller to replace missing attic vent. See attached property condition disclosure form. All right, so anybody want to throw out there why the first statement is poor language?
What expenses?
There you go. So in the RF 401, and also the 403 for new construction, there is defined seller expenses and buyer expenses. Those are capitalized terms. Capitalized terms have a meaning that's designated and specifically stated in the contract. When you start calling it things like seller's portion of expenses, that's not defined in the contract. That doesn't refer specifically to the capitalized term seller expenses. All right, so it's ambiguous. It doesn't refer to anything in the contract, and seller expenses and buyer expenses are already covered. It's in the contract, so you don't need to put it in there. All right. And how about this seller to replace missing attic vent? See attached property condition disclosure form.
That's not where it, well, I mean, I guess it could go in there, but
It could go in there to replace missing attic vent, but I would suggest it belongs more on a repair amendment.
yeah.
Right. And the biggie though is see attached property condition disclosure form. Do we want to attach a property condition disclosure form or an inspection report or a septic report or anything like that? Attaching it to the contract means it's part of the contract. And then it would be discoverable for, Angela, is it 6 years or 7 years? 7 years.
Are they talking about an exhibits and addenda?
Hmm?
Are they talking about an exhibits and addenda?
No, we're in special steps. If you say see attached property condition disclosure form. So even though it's not in the section above exhibits and addenda, the language see
I
attached.
never
property
put that in
conditions.
exhibits and addenda.
Right, either, yeah,
Because the
Yeah.
standard is a year on those forms, but if
Right.
you put it in the contract, it becomes 7 years.
so,
Is there ever a time when you would attach something?
there are some things,
Exhibits and addenda.
exhibits and addendum, and we're gonna talk about those in those Tennessee Realtor forms, exhibits and addenda, right? The different ones that are already created for us. That's where you put those. Dee, is there anything in particular you're thinking of, like a what? A drawing of a swimming pool? I don't know. I'm just trying to make a, you know,
Maybe.
what would you suggest? The general answer is no, don't attach it.
Maybe if, well, this is just a question, I don't know. If the house is in the middle of being remodeled or something, and you want to attach, I don't know, the plans for how they're gonna remodel whatever room they're remodeling, so you know what it's gonna look like when it's done, or I don't know. I don't think I've ever attached anything, and I don't know what an exhibit is, so.
Okay, then I would say, let's put a pin in that and we can talk more about it at the end, but the general answer is no.
Okay.
Unless it's a Tennessee Realtors form that's an
Yeah,
exhibit
addenda.
or an addendum, and we'll cover some of those in a bit. As a general rule, no. There
Right.
could be a few exceptions, but let's just go with the for the most part, no. All right, great. Okay, so here's another example. Contract is contingent on the purchase of 123 Main Street and seller to prove zoning. Again, folks, I didn't make this up. So anybody want to share what's wrong with the contract is contingent on the purchase of 123 Main Street?
Vague.
Well, first of all, it doesn't say when, it doesn't say, you know, by whom, who's purchasing it? The seller or the buyer, are they buying something at the same time, like through a 1031 exchange? Or is this the seller trying to find adequate housing? Because there's language for that, and it's not this. All right. It also doesn't have every contingency, every new term has to have a what if. So if it's contingent on this and this doesn't happen, what next? Does the buyer get their earnest money back? Does the seller get to keep earnest money? Does, you know, Does the buyer have to give their firstborn child to the seller? I don't know. It's not clear here. All right, seller to prove zoning. What does that mean? Prove zoning. What does it mean? By when? What's proof? What does that mean? It's very ambiguous. It doesn't. So as Bobby used to say, everything's fine until it's not. But this is ambiguous, and if it becomes disputed at the end, especially if there's a default and earnest money is at risk and stuff, this is going to create a problem both for the client and for you, right? All right, see, this is fun. Isn't this fun? All right. In case of a multiple offer situation, buyer will pay $1,000 over next highest bidder. Now, we're also immersed in the current seller's market that we've covered multiple offer situations fairly well. But this would need an escalation clause, and it would need an escalation clause that's well written. And we're going to use the village escalation form for this, but this is obviously ambiguous. It doesn't say that seller has to provide, evidence of the offer that invoked the escalation clause, all that sort of stuff. All right. Here's another one. CMLS for items not to remain with property, and contingent on buyer's approval of PUD/HPR docs. All right. Somebody want to throw out what's wrong with the first one? CMLS for items not to remain with property. Is anything that's in the MLS binding to the contract?
No.
If it's not written in the contract, it doesn't exist. So this is terrible. You need to take whatever is in, if it says in MLS, I don't know, basketball goal in the kitchen to remain, I don't know. Then you need to put that in here specifically, because the MLS listing is not part of this contract, and you would not attach it. To go back earlier about attachments, you would not attach an MLS listing. All right. Okay. Contingent on buyer's approval of PUD/HPR docs. What's wrong with that?
Vague.
Well, number one, what PUD/HPR docs?
Yeah.
Who has to deliver them? When do they have to be delivered by? What does approval mean? And if the buyer doesn't approve, what happens?
Yes.
What recourse do they have? If they're like, this is BS, no way I'm doing this, can they get it out of the contract? Doesn't say it here. So just because it says contingent, what is the contingency? It's either this or this. This is just the this part, not the or this part. Is that clear? Is it clear why this is not clear?
Yeah.
And we're going to get more into the forms, but does anybody want to jump ahead, look into the future about what would be a better approach than this crappy little 7-word sentence or whatever?
Anything.
It's a Tennessee Realtors form. It starts with a 7.
Oh, the 707.
The 709, the request for condominium association information. Now, D, you're not wrong. In the RF707, which we're going to cover more in a minute, there is some language about that, but there's an entire request form for condominium association, and with lots of different things you can ask for, not just this general PUD/HPR docs. It specifically says what you're asking for.
I don't remember all those numbers. But
you don't have to remember. You just need to know that there's a form for that, right? And then we'll talk about where to find those forms in a minute. But know that there is one, okay? All righty. So now we're going to jump into the RF707. Just use the script, the RF707. Now this is the additional contract language And it's language to be inserted into counter offers, addenda, amendments, and special steps. All right, bonus question, bonus round question. What's the difference between an addendum, plural addenda, and amendment, plural amendments?
Addendum is
Again-
like adding into the contract.
Yes.
Amendment is changing it.
Afterwards.
So addenda is adding in to a contract before it's fully agreed upon. Once it's a binding contract and you want to change it, once it's binding, you use an amendment. Before it's binding, you use an addenda. Addendum or addenda if you're using more than one.
Only
All
we-
right.
only we
So,
at- know
What's that? Question?
I was just smiling that only us at Village know that because we're smart.
That and 4 years of Latin, boom. Liberal arts education rocks. Okay, so RF 707. It's if anybody remembers an old Prego commercial for from the 80s, it's Prego pasta sauce. It's Prego, it's in there. And that's what I say about the RF 707. It's in there. You don't have to write it yourself. Why waste your time reinventing the wheel or possibly risking your license or your client's success? And just an FYI, the RF 707 is not a TREC form. It's a Tennessee Realtors form. All right, so TREC doesn't require us to use this language, but the Tennessee Realtors legal resources created it. They are lawyers. And so this is the language that they recommend that we use. All right, so, and as a caveat, all contracts, we all know, all contracts are special snowflakes. The RF 707 won't address every possible contingency, every possible situation. But check there first, because these are the ones that are the most common, have been requested the most. So check there first, and then we'll talk about what to do if it's not there. All right, so let's take a tour of the RF 707. And I won't go too in depth with any of these, but I really just want, hey, look, when I started out, I hadn't read the RF 707 through, and I can't tell you, I'm not going to tell you, even if I could, the number of times that I tried to write a special stipulation and it was already in RF 707 and I didn't remember it, that it was in there. Prego, it's in there. So let's just check a few things, and because hopefully, well, that's not true. I hope you all recognize all of these and know them already that they're there. But if not, then yay, you learned something today. Seller to pay buyer expenses. All right. So, isn't that funny and quaint how sellers used to pay buyer expenses for them and stuff? So it says buyer expenses. Now, I've seen things like, we'll see another example of that, poor wording, poor language. I'll see seller to pay $1,000 towards buyer's prepaids, closing costs, and XYZ. All right. You don't want to do that. Buyer's expenses is already a capitalized term. Again, capitalized term means capital B, capital E, right? It's defined in the contract. It means something. And if you check that section in the RF 401 and the 403, it defines specifically all the things that buyer expenses are. If you start making a list that's different than that, this overrides what's written in the contract. All right. So we want to leave the contract alone. This is just saying that the seller will pay blank amount to be applied towards anything that's already written in the contract in that section, right? So use this language. Buyer's right of first refusal, addendum, ding, ding, ding. There's a form for that, all right? So if you're in the RF 707 and it says addendum, you're like, whoop, I'm gonna have to go get the form and fill that out, all right? And there is a form for that. It's the, I don't remember the number. Or I hate when I can't remember it. Well, I'll come up with it in a second. All right. Reduction in price in lieu of repairs. Okay, so this is language you can read through there. This could include a reduction of the purchase price or an agreement for the seller to pay more prepaids and or closing costs. You could accomplish this through the use of an amendment. All right, in that form, you would include these things, you know. All right, so you could use this language in special stips. I would caution against that. As a general rule, we don't want to say anything about repairs in an amendment to the contract. You want to use the repair amendment. All right. If you do it as an amendment to the contract, then the title company, the lender, if there's a lender, is going to need a copy of that amendment, and they're going to say, wait a minute, what's this $10,000 in lieu of repairs? You know, we want to know what those repairs are. So even though you can, and this is the language you would use if you put it in the amendment or in the special stips, I would recommend check with your broker on this, that you put it in the repair amendments, not the amendment to the contract. All right. Assessment or liens. And this is if you know there's a lien on the property, you want to put this language in there. The parties here too are aware that there is a blank assessment or lien described within the property in this amount. All right, said assessment or lien shall be paid by blank at the closing of this sale. All right, we had a contract. I was part of a closing. We represented the buyer. The seller had not had disclosed a lien. We used this language, and that the seller was going to pay the lien. So it was in the contract. By the day of closing, he had not paid it. So at that point, he had to pay it that day or be in default. All right, so this language is important. If you know there's a lien on the property, if you know your seller has a lien on the property, you need to disclose that. And if you know if your buyer knows there's a lien, you need to use this language to protect them. All right. All right, more contingencies. Woo woo. Square footage. Has anybody been representing a client and the what's listed in the MLS for square footage is not what's listed in the tax system? It happens all the time. All right. So, and generally, what the seller discloses as a square footage, generally speaking, is always higher than what's in the tax system. So your buyer may want to say, hey, look, you know, I'm very concerned about this difference. So, and I don't trust this appraisal report that the seller gave me. We want our appraiser or our lender's appraiser to calculate square footage. And if it's not the same, we have the right to cancel the agreement with return of our earnest money. And all our, and the seller will reimburse the buyer for any out-of-pocket expenses to this point. Whoa, not including but not limited to the appraisal and inspection costs. Boom, what a huge contingency that is. All right. But if there's a massive difference and you're paying based on, in part, price per square foot, let's say there's 1,000 square feet difference. This could be very important. All right, is contingent on the sale of property. So you remember in one of our earlier examples, it says, is contingent on the purchase of 123 Main Street. I did change the actual address, but so no. Here's the language, it's already here. This agreement is contingent upon the sale and closing of a property located at blank. So this is contingent on for the buyer to sell their property. All right. And I have seen a number of times this, especially recently. I can't because it's a tough time to find a property to go to. Yolanda, you can talk about that, right? So. So the language is already here. Approval of others. This came up for me just this week. All right. So let's say that it's being bought by a married couple and one of the spouses is traveling. All right. And they're not able to physically view the property, or the situation that I had was the buyer is located in California and was going to come to see the property, but we needed to get the contract in place before he was going to fly out there. All right, so it was contingent upon his physically seeing, like getting to the into the property to see it. I confirmed with Colin Wainwright that if you do a FaceTime tour where you're taking the buyers through there because they're not physically there, that does not constitute seeing the property unless you write that into special steps. All right. So, which probably not going to do that when you represent the buyer. So if somebody needs to see the property, but you need to go binding before that, this is the contingency language you would use. All right, more contingencies. Seller's right to find suitable housing. So we just saw the language where it was contingent upon the buyer selling their property, their current house to buy this. This is saying, it says the seller will agree to the contract, but they have a right, there's a contingency that they have to find a home for them to live in. All right. And again, when you remember the language we looked at it before, it says is contingent upon the purchase of 123 Main Street. It's important to say who's purchasing it, when they have to purchase it by, and what happens if they're not able to do it. All right. So the other one is who needs to sell a property, when they need to sell it by, and what happens if they can't sell it. All right. Radon. This offer is contingent upon the radon testing of blank. Property must have a test result of blank. And if the radon test shows a reading higher than blank, then so-and-so is going to have that installed at a cost not to exceed this. All right. So if there is a concern about radon, of course, we should be advising all our buyer clients to do radon testing because we're in a heavy radon area here. So, but let's say we've got a concern for whatever reason, maybe all the houses around it, you can see the active radon mitigation system pipes coming out and everybody around them has it. This may be a big concern to your buyers, so you'd want to put that in the contingency. Alternate appraisal language, so you can take a look at that. Bankruptcy pending, so this section, GHI, is what if the courts are involved. Bankruptcy pending, court permission to sell, sound like I'm from East Tennessee, which I am, so I can make that joke. So bankruptcy pending, court permission to sell. You've got an estate. This happens a lot when you've got an estate bankruptcy. So check here, and then divorce. All right. Those can get real yucky, right? Okay. And so going back to, so now I've jumped over to the purchase and sale agreement, PSA, purchase and sale agreement, the RF401. Remember in this, it already says buyer's additional due diligence options. So if any of the matters below were of concern, buyer should address the concern by specific contingency in the special stipulation section of the agreement. So if the buyer wants to hear some other contingencies that your buyer might want to put in there, and the buyer at buyer's cost shall have the right to review and accept the following, all these things. If these things are important and they are deal breakers, then it's not enough just to advise your client, your buyer client with the get a property survey, get an inspection form, and it's got radon on there. You need to write the contingency in here. Zoning regulation. Remember that language that said seller to prove zoning? That's not enough. Here it says all zoning regulations, restrictions, declarations, covenants, easements, and other title matters of record. And that is the buyer's responsibility, not the seller's. If you write it in and the seller agrees to it, then you need to make specific what proving that means. But if you can, use the language that's already there. And now we get deeper into zoning. And when you're working with investors, it can be a big deal, especially when you're trying to get a client with who wants a short-term rental. So zoning, rezoning contingency. I've seen it often, I'm sure you have too, in MLS when it says, you know, can be rezoned. Well, can is one thing. What does that mean? Is it likely to? Is it unlikely to? On Pricing Pros, we had several months ago, we were looking at a property that would be better served. Its highest and best use was not in its current zone. So, but there are others where, if you're in a residential area, is it likely that you're going to be able to get that rezoned to be a short-term rental eligible? Probably not. So, rezoning contingency, and then homes converted to multifamily use where zoning for multifamily use may be questioned. Boy, we're getting deep in the weeds there. So, but when you're working with investors and you've got multifamily, you might want to check out this language and see if you need this contingency to protect your investor. All right, the investor client. Pools, who wants to work with a property with pools? Not me, But if you do, check the RF707, because this is going to say that you're going to need the additional information. And this is saying the seller has to provide you within X days after binding agreement, all this information. And your buyer is still probably going to get their own inspection, but the seller has to provide all this information. If you don't ask for it and get it binding, the seller could say, no, but this would require them to get that information. Okay, condos. All right, we're down a section on condominiums, condominium legal description, and condominium information review period. Remember that bad language about contingent upon review of PUD/HPR docs? All right, at minimum, you want to use this language in a special stip. Ideally, you do that and include the RF709 in the offer package, right? Get that on the front end. And the RF709 has a bunch of stuff in there. It specifically says what information you're asking for. Okay. HOAs, HOA review period. Okay. So at minimum, if there's an HOA, you want this information. All right. Now, the seller is supposed to put this information, the name and address of HOA, amount of dues and required frequency of payment, blah, 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 is supposed to put some of this information in where? That's right, folks, the property condition disclosure form. All right. So, but how many times have you seen it blank? I've seen it blank at least twice. I'd say a lot more than that. So this is putting, and then it says down below, in consideration of the buyer having received this information and reviewed it, we can say yay or nay. This is a contingent, it could be a deal breaker. You know, if the HOA documents say, if the seller says, oh, the HOA will allow you to put a fence up, and the HOA docs say, under no circumstances will anyone in this neighborhood ever have a stick of fencing up, and that's a deal breaker, your buyer needs a contingency to get out of the situation. Okay.
Is there, since we seem to have a piece of paper for everything,
Yeah.
is there one for the buyer has read all the HOA information and approves it? How do you, is that on a notification? Do you just notification it? Yeah.
You can notification it. I love it. Let's verbatize everything today. Verbatize.
Yeah.
So notification form, and that's good practice. It's excellent practice, Dee. Very good. In reality, do we all send that? Generally, no. It's generally an email. It'll say in here, after all requested HOA information by written notice to seller, if any of the above matters are unacceptable.
Yes. Okay.
It doesn't say they have to communicate it if it is accessible. It's kind of like a don't ask, don't tell. If you don't hear from them, then, but it is excellent practice to communicate.
Okay.
All right. And investors part 2, rental property. Rental lease is in review, especially if you're working with income generating property. Something that's being used as a rental and the seller is advertised that it's got good cash flow, blah, blah, blah. Then to help protect your buyer, you may want to have a contingency that they can review their actual leases and books and stuff. Inspection period, if property is used as a rental, sometimes it's hard to get, inspection done when you've got a renter in there. So if there's an issue with that, you could use this language. And then rent proration. If rent's already been paid and you're going to close in the middle of the month, for example, how would that, all prepaid rents, how would those be dealt with? And these are all things that you need to think about ahead of time based on the type of property and the client's intended use of the property. Because you want to get this in writing before the contract goes binding, so it's legally binding, and your buyer has recourse should they not receive the documents they need, should they find during their review period that there's something that's unacceptable, blah, blah, blah. All right. My husband's boss's boss used to, my husband used to call it feeding the alligator. Like he wanted to get all the information as much as possible, because if you feed the alligator, it's not going to bite you, right? So if you have all this information disclosed and requested and the contingency set up right on the front end, nobody's surprised and it doesn't get as contentious as it can, right? Earnest money, trust money. Oh yeah, there's a special stipulation language for that. Earnest money, trust money, if there's going to be additional earnest money or trust money held by the broker. If earnest money is going to be held until a specific time, like it won't be deposited, like, can you hold this check? Can't imagine anybody doing that, but whatever. And non-refundable earnest money. Has anybody used that to make your buyer's offer more appealing these days? I've seen it several times and I hear it talked about. All right. So if you want to have the earnest money go hard, either from the get-go, like let's do a buyer to deposit $10,000 in earnest money, $2,000 of which is non-refundable, for example. Like, I'm serious. And this is the buyer saying, I'm dead serious. We're buying this thing. We're going forward. And this is how I'm going to show you that. If you're going to and that can be called making it go hard. If you're talking about that with your client as an option, check out this language. All right. Inspections and road access. We just helped a seller close on a house that had a shared driveway. All right. Let's say you check and you find there's an easement that travels with the deed. All right. So if those things are known or if they're not known, but there's a concern because you can see the shared driveway, Dee Davis. No, it's not yours. Sorry, it's not Dee's, it's Jan's. Sorry, Jan Walters has a deal going on right now. And I was thinking Pegram, but no, it's a different one. Sorry. Anyway, this is if there's road access to public roads, check that. All right. Oh, on inspection cost, for example, we had a client, the seller was offering to have the septic system, pumped and inspected and a letter and all that thing. So generally inspection costs are borne by the buyers. This is a situation where the seller said, you know what, I'll pay for that and you'll get the results and we'll do that before closing and I'll take care of it. All right. And this gets into the really there are more section. Buyer agent buying to sell for a profit. So that's, you'd also have to use a personal interest disclosure form. There's a form for that, right? Amenity package release, if you've got new construction and they don't have the amenities package ready yet, but your buyer has a right to see that. Property exchange, this is if you're doing a 1031 exchange. I'm seeing a lot of those lately. So this is a good thing to disclose to your buyers that this is being to your seller, that this is being part of a 1031 exchange. So the timing is important. So this is disclosing to the seller, hey, look, this is what the buyer's doing. You're agreeing to help us make this timeline, right? Seller reserves the right to sell, exclusive agency agreement. Okay, so that's where we're not designated agent. This is exclusive agency. So the seller can sell, but you would also have this in your listing agreement. Non-assignability. All right, so if you want to specify that by your seller that the buyer cannot assign the contract can only between the seller and this buyer, then you'd want to use this language. And FERPTA, if anybody remembers what FERPTA stands for, actually, you're a better human being than I am. I know generally what it is, though. Foreign corporations. I can read it off here, but and then foreign corporations that have made an election under IRC. So if you've got a foreign investor that's buying a property, or resident alien status, if you're representing a buyer that is not a US citizen. Okay. Woof. All right, we're 3 minutes over, so I'm going to do this this last part quickly. Just by quick show of hands, did anybody see something in the RF707 that they didn't realize was there? What'd you say, Dee?
Probably. There was a lot.
There's a lot.
I
Yeah.
basically decided I just need to spend some quality time with it.
Yeah, absolutely. Some quality time. Exactly. Very
Yeah.
good.
Yeah.
And we'll skip this part. I've done a 2-minute tech tip on this, but I'm happy anybody who wants to stay, I can demonstrate this for you. Do you have to type all that in? No, all these, you can find all this language in the RF707. And you can get that either through Transaction Desk or Tennessee Realtor site. But as we've talked on several occasions, in Transaction Desk, if you use Transaction Desk, you go to your clauses, and everything that's in the RF707 is under this system clauses. So everything that we just went through, all that language is available to grab and insert into special Stips. So you've got no reason not to use it. All right. Okay. So just a couple more examples as it gets worse. So this was, again, I just grabbed and placed it in here. All right. Purchase price to be $176. Why do you need to put that in there? It's on page 1, what it's going to be. Now, if this was a counteroffer, that would be, different, but this was actually in the buyer's offer. They just wanted to say it again. All right. Seller will pay up to $7,000 in closing costs and or prepaids. Again, this should say, we should get the language from RF707 that says seller will pay up to $7,000 towards buyer's expenses, because buyer's expenses is a capitalized term, as is seller's expenses and title expenses. Seller will provide a copy of survey prior to closing. Is that like we meet on the steps of Rudy Title as we're walking into closing and they hand us a copy of the survey? That seems a little late. All right, sale contingent upon satisfactory home inspection. What does that even mean? All right. All right. Should seller want to close earlier than September 26, 2019, then buyer agrees as long as inspections resolutions are satisfied and closing attorneys have all docs ready. Yeah, exactly. D, that's what yeah, exactly. Seller to provide proof of height limit of house to the right if you're facing the home to buyer during the inspection period. Now, at least they specified when it has to be provided during the inspection period. Proof of height limit of house to the right if you're facing the home. All right, and buyer is buying property with funds from 1031 exchange plus cash. That's a nice try. I give them credit for putting something in there, but again, there's better language in the RF707, so just grab it and plop it in here. All right, seller to provide fencing that, quote, completely contains rear yard and garage port. Seller to allow buyer's input. Okay. Buyer shall have a boundary survey of the property. All right. Thanks for letting us know. Home inspection will be scheduled once home is substantially complete. with all mechanicals operational. And buyers to have input on fireplace surround, backsplash, and kitchen countertop. Doesn't that sound like fun for the seller? Buyers to have input on that. What does that mean? This was obviously from new construction. I'm not even going to read this one. You guys can check it out. This was an actual just disaster one, but it was mine. So let's go around. We'll say 470, line 475. Seller will have septic inspected and cleaned out prior to closing. Again, when? With written documentation showing septic system to be in, quote, properly in functioning order. All right, so again, there's language in there about if the seller is going to pay for inspection. So, all right. So beyond the RF707, real quickly, what to do. Here's some examples of things that are not covered that are just kind of those special, extra special things. Repair of defects not found due to seasonal issues. For example, it's the middle of winter, the pool is covered and there's, it's empty or, whatever. Swap of real estate property. And that really happens, so the seller and the buyer are going to, assignability emphasis. Lloyd Carney gave me that one. I'm not sure I know what assignability emphasis means, but down payment funds assistance if your buyer is going to receive funds from a family member, for example, so they don't have proof of funds, for example, from a bank or a lender right now, you might want to do that. And non-refundable earnest money, that it actually is covered now. I need to check it out. But generally speaking, if you're getting into some dicey, some choppy waters, I should say, some choppy waters with special Stips language, talk to your broker or talk to your title company and get them to help. If it's anything that's even remotely touching upon something that's legal and not businessy, then check with your broker, check with your title company. And unless you have a law degree, don't practice law. So there's a lot of debate on to counter an expired offer, to revive a dead offer. All right. There are two schools of thought. Number one is if the both parties agree, then okay, we can do it. But let's say the time limit of offer is 12:00 p.m. today, and it's 12:30 before you submit your counter offer. The contract died at 12:00. The offer was done. Right? So technically you can't counter an offer that's dead, right? But there are some parties, including a notable title attorney around here who thinks that who says by the letter of the law, by the letter of the contract, no, you can't. But if both parties intend for that to happen, then yes. Really the best thing to do would be what? If you've missed the timeline for a counter,
Rewrite it.
Yep.
Yeah.
But if this is language that Lloyd Carney provided us, this counteroffer is being executed by all parties to evidence their intent to be bound by the terms contained in the purchase and sale offer dated blank. All right. So there's some risk to doing that because by the letter of the contract it expired, but there is language for that. Now, real quick, do we use a special stip box or the addendum? If it's going to be an exhibit attached to it or an addendum attached to it, it needs to be here. And then if there's any special stipulations that modify terms in the contract, all right, special steps modify what's in the purchase and sale agreement template. All right, exhibits and addenda are tacked on the end. All right, so please use the right box. If you're going to use the escalation clause exhibit, what box would you put that in? Right here. So in here, you type escalation clause exhibit. If you're going to use the request for condominium association information, which is the RF709, in here, you put request RF709 request for condominium association information. If you want to use the language that's in special steps about that, you'd put it down here. All right. And so lastly, there's an addendum. I was trying to make a play on there's an app for that, but there's an ad for that. So yeah, it was a little bit of a stretch, but I tried. So these are some of the I'm sure you know about. For example, this RF625, the FHA VA addendum. All right, we've probably most of us have used that. The temporary occupancy agreement for the buyer prior to closing. And it's a fraternal twin, the temporary occupancy agreement for the seller after closing, right? So we'd want to use that. Seller's right to continue to market the property addendum. All right, so if there are a number of contingencies in the contract, then the seller might want to say, I'll agree to your home sale contingency and I'll agree to this other contingency, but I get to continue to market the property. All right. Backup agreement contingency addendum. If you don't get the binding contracts, you may reach out to the seller's agent and say, hey, look, we'd like to be in the primary backup position, and there's an addendum for that. So you've put that in there. All right. So, and a few reminders. And again, I apologize for starting late and going over. Thank you for your patience. So just some best practices when you're putting things in special stips, include the line number of the language that's being modified, adjusted. So line 4, seller name to be John Q. Public. Line 72, purchase price to be X plus 1,000, whatever. Another one, include the addenda. We just talked about this. Include addenda in the box above special stips. And don't forget to attach it with your counteroffer, all right? With your offer, your counteroffer. Never attach or incorporate the property condition disclosure form. Never, never. Use the clauses library and transaction desk to quickly grab that language for special stips, all right? And if what you have or what you need isn't already in the RF707 or covered by an addendum or a form, check with your broker or title company. All right, don't practice law. And lastly, words and phrases not to use. Do not use null and void. That means something very specific legally. And it, as Inigo Montoya says, I do not think that means what you think it means, right? So null and void. Totally, whenever, notwithstanding. That means something very specific. 100% complete. All right, that's a never use absolutes. Immediately. And this one, buyer and seller shall later agree on this. Oh, well, we'll do that later. Right? If it's not in writing in the contract, it doesn't exist. All right, so I won't reread our course objectives. I want to show you one other little thing, but hopefully we achieved these today. If not, I do apologize. Please give me feedback on this. I'm trying to improve this. Of course, I've only done this one other time. This is my second time, so you're not my guinea pigs, but close to it. And I'm going to be submitting this one to eventually to Trek. I'd like to teach this stuff. All righty, I just want to share one other thing. How do I unshare? Stop share. All right. Just one other thing here real quick. I told you that I'd show you in transaction desk. Something, share screen, transaction desk, share. All right, so if you want to, where you can grab these clauses, so I'll go to class sample listing. So you go into your transaction, you pick let's go with the forms. Let's find the purchase and sale agreement. Well, I'll grab a counter offer just because I see it. And you find a text box, a multi-line text box. That's the thing where you can just type away, type. And then you go to the clauses up here, the little paper and pencil. Go to system clauses. And that's where all those things, and they're divvied up. Isn't that nice? Seller to pay buyer's expenses, buyer's first right of refusal, blah, blah, blah. These are all the ones that we looked at. All you do is select, and you can select more than one. Do okay, and it plops them in there. All right. Last thing that I want to show you. D, this will address a question that you had.
Hey, Rebecca.
Yes.
It's Andrea. I just have a quick question. You know, I recently, because of the nature of the market, I've had to use a lot of the clauses and just tips. I'm sure you said this earlier, but I just want to confirm they don't always all fit because you got everything else going on in there. What are we attaching them to? Are we just saying see attached? Are we, what are we putting them on? If they'd all.
That's a great question. So I'll go back to this. And so these are my forms. So again, you know, the question is the special Stips box, they made it this big. It used to be this big. They did that on purpose because they want to direct people towards the correct additional forms, exhibits, and addenda that are there. But if you need additional space, then you go into your forms here. And you go to, sorry. It's going to be an addendum, and it's the RF633. So I'm going to grab that. I'm going to add it to my transaction forms. Oh, I'm not sharing my screen, am I? I'm sorry. I apologize. That was rude. Okay. So I'm gonna go, okay. So I'm at my forms. I'm in transaction desk. I'm in a transaction. I'm in the forms. I go to add a form. I scroll, go to the 2021 TAR forms. And this is going to be an addendum because again, you're writing the offer and you're putting these things in special Stips. So this is before you have a binding agreement, we're going to use an addendum. So we need a blank addendum form. All right. So I'm going to scroll down and go addendum to the purchase and sale agreement. All right. And I've checked the box. I add it. I scroll down and addendum to the purchase and sale agreement. And you can see it's blank and it's got a bigger box. All right, so you can put them here. Does that help, Andrea?
Yeah, it does. It just makes me realize a mistake I made in an offer we just did. So now I need to change it to an amendment, I guess.
If it's something that you're adding after you have a binding contract.
Yeah.
It's an amendment.
It being a second addendum, it's becoming an amendment. So.
Right.
Yeah. Okay.
Alrighty. All right. Stop share. Last thing, I promise, I swear. It's about forms. This is going to address a question that Dee had. I go here, share screen, and I'm going to the, oh, where's my, here it is. Okay. So I'm going to the Tennessee REALTORS site. Are you guys seeing that on my screen now? Yep. Okay, great. Go to members, go to forms on the fly. All right. So now, as we know how to add forms in transaction desk. They're all the Tennessee REALTORS forms get loaded there at the beginning of every year. So if there are any updates and everything, you've got the current year's forms. But if I go to forms on the fly, this is a really, really neat site. The first thing that I like is the current year, the current year forms inventory list. if you want to know if there's a form or an addendum for that, here's where you can find it. Right? So there's ones that we use all the time, the RF101, exclusive right to sell, blah, blah, blah. The 201 Tennessee property condition form. But there are lots of others too that maybe you haven't seen before. Notification of change in status or agency relationship. Often we've seen the personal interest disclosure and consent, wire fraud warning, COVID release, purchase and sale agreement, new construction purchase and sale agreement, lot land purchase sale agreement. What are some condominium legal description exhibit? There's special Stips language or RF707 language for that, but there's actually an exhibit. I wanted to go to, here's the backup agreement contingency addendum. If you didn't get the contract, but you want to be the primary backup. Temporary occupancy agreement, we know about all those. But then there's some of these others that that maybe you didn't know about. The multiple offer disclosure notification. Hopefully you're using that form with your sellers when you have multiple offers, because it can help, encourage more competition, blah, blah, blah. So check out all of those, and in the list, it starts with residential forms to start with, and then it goes into the commercial forms underneath. So this is just a list. All right, but let's go back to this great thing. And now look at this. Forms, you can sort by category. Agency agreements, great. Disclosures, great. And then you can click on those and grab the form there. And then over here, there might be, like this one, there may be some additional information on septic disclosures and related info. Got a buyer who's buying a property with septic and you don't know much about it and they don't know much about it. This might be something you want to print and send to them. Subsurface sewage disposal system permit disclosure as septic, right? So these are all disclosures. So those are disclosures by clients. Then you've got disclosures by realtors, confirmation of agency, all that sort of stuff. More helpful resources. They've got a residential listing package set up here. Now, Colin kindly has done that for us in Transaction Desk. But if you don't have a Colin, you can do it here. Here's one to add for short sales. What if you're doing a lot land listing package? What do I need for that? We don't have a template for that in Transaction Desk. So here's what you need to use. Residential sale package. We're all pretty good on that, but in case you forgotten. For short sales, first time with a short sale, that's what you need. Lot and land sale package, gotta have all this. New construction sale package, working with new construction, check it out. They've created these for you. Leases, we don't do those here at a village, but if you go elsewhere and do, and please don't go elsewhere, please stay. Inspections package, lead-based paint, repair place amendment, PCD, buyer's final inspection, importance of inspection and property survey, new construction, all right. Disclosures package, all the things that your seller might need to disclose, all right? So they've got all these things in there. Prego, it's in there. Check out the Tennessee Realtors if you're looking for a form. Check out the RF707 if you're looking for language for special Stips. And I thank you all very much for your patience and for showing up today. If you have any questions at all, you can let me know. If you're completely confused, please talk to Angela or one of the other brokers. And if you have feedback for this on this class, please let me know. Any questions? Other questions? All righty. Thank you guys so much. I didn't even look at the chat. Did someone already ask to zoom in? It was a thanks to. Okay, all the chat has to do with technology and operator error. So thank you again for showing up today. If I can help you at all, please let me know.
Thanks, Rebecca. Thank you so much.
Thanks, bye.